everybody, and welcome to our keynote in Visamera today. I am so happy to have you all here. My name is Elena Lemos, and I am the coordinator for Student Exchange and International Relations at the Faculty of Medicine, RWTH Aachen University. And today we are having our fourth and last keynote in our Visamera program. It's a very special keynote. We have two speakers today. For those of you who are not participating in Visamera, let me briefly tell you about the program. Visamera is a virtual program for research for health profession students from all over the world. And this program was designed in collaboration with Peruvian University Cayetano Heredia in Lima, Peru, and with Centro Christus in Brazil, in Fortaleza. Visamera is a virtual program sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research and by the German Academic Exchange Service. Now, like I told you, this keynote is a special one. We have two speakers today from organized by Unicristus. And the topic for today is the use of psychedelic drugs from the Amazon rainforest in psychiatric therapeutics. So I will now greet Professor Araujo and Dr. Palhano. Hello, good evening, good day to you in Natal, right?
Yes. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Diana.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to tell now our audience a little bit about you. I will start with Dr. Palhano, who you now see on the screen. Dr. Fernanda Palhano-Fontes is a research engineer at the Brain Institute in Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Natal, Brazil. Dr. Palhano holds the first double degree in electrical engineering from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte and from the École Nationale Supérieure d'Électrotechnique in Toulouse, France. Dr. Palhano completed her master's degree and her PhD in neurosciences at the Brain Institute from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte. Her areas of interest and expertise are psychedelics, psychiatry, and imaging techniques, as well as electroencephalography. She is involved in several research projects and has a vast list of research articles published. And now I will read briefly about Professor Draulio Barros de Araujo. He is a physicist, professor and researcher at the Brain Institute as well, in Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte in Natal, Brazil. Professor Araujo is an expert in several areas, such as functional neuroimaging, psychedelics, cognitive neuroscience, and brain mapping. He was a researcher and a professor at Universidade de São Paulo and at the Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, as well as the University of California in USA. Professor Araujo has focused his research for the last 15 years using functional neuroimaging methods to investigate the acute and lasting effects of the psychedelic ayahuasca, including clinical trials testing for the antidepressant effects of ayahuasca. So after introducing our speakers today, I believe Professor Araujo is going to start with the presentation today. And after that, Dr. Palhano will continue. I kindly ask all of you in our audience to stay until the end in order to ask your questions to our experts today. please use this opportunity to ask your questions. It's not that we have every day the chance to contact and to ask questions to researchers of this rank. So use this opportunity to ask your questions. So now the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Eliana. I have to say that's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the University of Aachen, Unicristus, and the Peruvian University, all part of the SEMERA program. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And so we decided to have a presentation split in half, in which I'm going to give the first half of the presentation, then Fernanda will join in and have the second part of the presentation. And the way we structured it is basically a temporal, so we looked at the timeline of our research, and the idea then here is so that I'll present the beginning of our research with psychedelics, and then Fernanda will speak a little bit more of our later effects of these substances. And on the other end, we have been also interested in conducting clinical trials with these substances in clinical populations, specifically in patients with depression. So we have been working with psychedelics since 2006. But before I get to the beginning of our work with these substances, it's probably important for me to define what these substances are. So define what psychedelics are. Psychedelics are given different names, and here I list the three main names that psychedelics receive: hallucinogens, psychedelics, and entheogens. The idea then here of calling these substances hallucinogens is basically because one of the main and well-known effects of these substances are the modulation it produces on our visual system. Hallucinations or hallucinogens is certainly not the best name for these substances, because when you speak about hallucinations, you're basically speaking about a phenomena that occurs in our physical world. So in other words, when people are having hallucinations, they project their visual images on the world with their eyes open. Although psychedelics although these substances modulate our visual system very strongly, the modulation on the visual system happens mainly when your eyes are closed. So if I were to have a parallel between the visual phenomena that happens under the influence of these substances with a natural occurring phenomena, I would say that the visions that occur are very similar to the visions that occur when we are dreaming with our eyes closed. So that's the reason why maybe the word hallucinogens it's not suited for describing these effects. Entheogens is on the other end of this spectrum and basically speaks about some of the effects that are common with these substances, which are effects more related to sacredness or a mystical type of experience, and therefore the use of entheogens. In other words, the borning of God from inside. Of course, that from the scientific point of view, entheogens is not the best word to describe these substances. So we use generally the term psychedelics, which is a term that was coined in the 1950s by this psychiatrist, this English psychiatrist called Humphrey Osmond, and this writer, philosopher Aldous Huxley, that came up with the idea that the experience that these substances produce are more related to a mind manifesting nature of these effects. So in other words, it would be an experience in which you'd get in contact with the essence of your own mind. the effects of these substances are very specific and also very difficult to describe. Here, I'm just bringing about some of these effects that were listed by these American psychology, Walter Pahnke, that tended to understand that the most prominent effects of these substances are related to the mystical type of experiences that these substances promote. And here I list some of these, such as unity, the idea that you are united to other things and to other people. The transcendency of time and space, in the sense that time and space kind of quit existing, the sense of sacredness, the difficulty of describing the experience. So in other words, the ineffability of the experience, and so on. So these are some of the effects that are very characteristic of the experience with these substances. From the pharmacological point of view, these substances are well defined as with regards to its structures. Here I list some of these psychedelic substances, such as psilocybin, and then dimethyltryptamine, or simply DMT, LSD, and a very well-known neurotransmitter, which is serotonin. If you compare, for instance, the structure of serotonin with psilocin or with NN-DMT, you see that they are very close to one another with respect to their structure. And in fact, one of the best definitions, one of the best pharmacological definition of these substances comes from what we call receptome, which is a map on that we can describe to which neuroreceptors a specific substance binds to. And a very pronounced property of these substances is the fact that they bind specifically to serotonin receptors. So therefore, they're known as serotonin agonists. So they tend to bind to the same neuroreceptors that serotonin bind. That, in part at least, gives to these substances very specific aspects and very important to comment on. The first one is that although we call them psychedelic drugs, they do not have some of the property of the most well-known drugs, such as alcohol, tobacco, cocaine, and so on. One of the differences, for instance, between psychedelics and these substances that I've just listed is the fact that psychedelics does not have tolerance. In other words, it does not have an addictive behavior associated with the use of these substances. So psychedelics are not addictive. And as a matter of fact, one of the therapeutic promises that psychedelics have is to treat the abusive use of specific substances such as crack, cocaine, alcohol, and tobacco. The other property of these substances is the fact that they do not have overdose. So in other words, the dose that you need in order to kill a biological system by an overdose using this substance is so high that we basically say that this substance does not have overdose. So that you have an idea on how high am I speaking about, some of these substances you need to ingest, for instance, around 100 milliliters of the substance in order to have a psychedelic experience. When we talk about overdose, I'm talking about 30 liters of this substance. So in order to have an overdose, you'd have to climb from a typical dose of 100 milliliters to 30 liters. And of course, I mean, it's even difficult to ingest 30 liters of water or whatever. In the 50s and in the 60s, these substances gained a lot of space, both clinically and in research laboratories around the world, specifically in the US, including very well-known universities such as Harvard. These are two very well-known professors in the field of research with psychedelics, Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary, both psychologists and both professors of the Harvard University, from the psychology department in Harvard University, where they started in the 60s a number of research projects around psychedelic substances. One of them that became very well known is the Harvard Psilocybin Project, in which they conducted a lot of different research protocols. Unfortunately, due to many different reasons, but mostly political reasons, these substances got rescheduled by the Nixon government, and they got rescheduled to what we call Schedule 1 substances. And Schedule 1 are substances that has a high potential of abuse, does not have any currently acceptable medical use, and that is dangerous. Now we know that none of these characteristics apply to psychedelics, but as I've mentioned, for a number of different reasons, not scientifically oriented decision, these substances became prohibited. And that was true until the beginning of the 90s, when research re-emerged. And this is one of the first researchers that started again of doing research with these substances, which is a psychiatrist called Rick Strassman, that in 1994, he started a line of research testing this psychedelic substance and dimethyltryptamine in healthy individuals. From there, from 1994 up to today, the number of research centers that are interested in conducting research with psychedelics is very vast and increasing in the later years. We, at our group, since 2006, we have been studying this psychedelic substance that's original from the Amazon region, which is called ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a name in Quechua, which is the language spoken by Amerindians, so indigenous population from South America. And it's a word that's translated by the vine of the spirits or the vine of the souls. So the idea here is that these substance leads to very specific type of experiences that are, as I've mentioned before, related to sacredness, related to a mystical type of experience, related to death somehow. And that for the name ayahuasca, the vine of the spirits. Ayahuasca, from a preparation perspective, is basically based on two different plants from the Amazon region. On the left, you see the Banisteriopsis capi, that's a vine that climbs to the treetops of the Amazon rainforest, especially on riverbanks. From the Banisteriopsis capi, the indigenous population use the bark. And together with the bark, the indigenous population started mixing this other plant, the Psychotria viridis, which is a plant also natural from the Amazon region, that's in the same family of the coffee tree. So if you look at the plant on the right, you see that it looks, for those of you who have seen a coffee tree, you see that there is a lot of similarities between these two plants. In one of the plants, so the idea is basically mixing these two plants with water and then boiling it for hours, sometimes days. That therefore you call it a decoction, which is boiling in water for very long periods of time and then extracting this brownish liquid with a very characteristic taste and smell. From the pharmacological point of view, one of the plants, the Psychotria viridis, the leaves of the plant, is rich on the same psychedelic substance that Rick Strassman was studying before in 1994. So the leaves of the Psychotria viridis gives the psychedelic tryptamine and N-dimethyltryptamine. The point is that N-dimethyltryptamine, as any other monoamine, it gets degraded by enzymes we have in our stomach. So it means that if you ingest any monoamine, including DMT, you won't have any type of effect because NN-DMT will be degraded in our digestive system. But the indigenous people, they discovered, and then they found this invention, which was if they mixed this plant with the other plant, with Banisteriopsis caapi, you'd actually give rise to the effects of NN-DMT even when ingested. And that was because the other plant is full of inhibitors of the monoamine oxidase enzyme. And therefore, it protects NN-DMT against this process of degradation that it feels in our stomach. And so when you have this preparation, ayahuasca, you have a full psychedelic experience that mostly come from the presence of NN-DMT in the preparation. Ayahuasca is known for a very long time in the Amazon region. The first scientific encounter of ayahuasca came from this English ethnobotanist, Richard Spruce, that had this expedition in the Amazon region for 15 years. And in these 15 years, Spruce encountered ayahuasca in 3 different circumstances, all being used by indigenous population specifically and most often as a medication. This gave rise in the beginning of the 20th century. So this technology, this indigenous invention, conquered urban centers, started to disseminate in urban centers in the beginning of the 20th century, and gave rise in Brazil to 3 different religions: the Santo Daime, the União do Vegetal, and the Barquinha. And today, the estimates is that these 3 religions have about 50,000 affiliates to the 3 religions. In 2006, then the first set of experiments that we've begun was by applying some neuroimaging tools, so functional neuroimaging, specifically functional magnetic resonance imaging, with the idea of understanding the effects of ayahuasca in the brain. And to do so, we recruited people with a lot of experience in the use of ayahuasca from one of these churches, from the Santo Daime Church. And we had these people then coming to the hospital and having their brain scanned while they were under the influence of ayahuasca. Back then, we were interested in understanding basically 2 different processes, one of them related to the visions. And this, what you see here, are the results of brain areas that are modulated by ayahuasca when people are having the visions or when they're dreaming with their eyes closed. And what you see here is the modulation of some brain regions that are related to vision. So in other words, people are actually seeing the images in the very same nature or status of reality that we confer to different visions we have when we are in this ordinary state of consciousness. So when you have your eyes open and you look at something, the type of experience that these people have under the influence of ayahuasca carries the same nature of reality. Here we see another set of brain structures that are related, for instance, with memory, and that are also related to what we call introspection. So in other words, our ability to be aware to our own thoughts and to our own emotions. And in fact, in this other study, we also looked for brain networks that are related to processes associated with introspection. And therefore, we do see that ayahuasca modulates some of these brain regions that are related to this ability to see, to be aware to our own thoughts and our own emotion, to a point that the hypothesis that we work in our group is that ayahuasca gives the possibility for people to see their own thoughts when they have their eyes closed. Back when we also started the second line of research, which was to understand the impact of ayahuasca as an antidepressant. And in 2008, we started a first open label trial with 7 patients with treatment-resistant depression. So patients that did not respond to any conventional treatment we have in the market. And here what you see are patients that did not have any previous experience with ayahuasca, all with treatment-resistant depression, coming to a university hospital and having one intervention with ayahuasca. What you see in the graph is the symptoms of depression presented by these patients before, during, and after the intervention. And what you see in this preliminary evaluation is that there is a very rapid effect of ayahuasca as an antidepressant, meaning that one day after the session, patients already presented a significant improvement of their symptoms of depression. With that very promising results, we conducted a second open label trial, now with 17 patients, and observed results very similar to our first trial. What you see here in orange and then in blue is the symptoms of depression, is the severity of depression before, during, and then after the intervention, a single intervention with ayahuasca. And what we observed here is that one day after the session, there is already a significant improvement of the symptoms, and that improvement kept on in this trial for 21 days. The problem with this trial is the fact that it is not randomized. So therefore, in 2009, and now with Fernanda Palhano entering the group, we started then programming a randomized placebo-controlled trial, which is the second half of the story that Fernanda is going to tell you about. So thank you very much, and I'll be here for questions at the end of our conversation. Thank you. Fernanda, it's with you now.
Thank you, Draulio. Let's see here. Yeah. So thank you, Draulio, for the presentation. Thank also Aliana for the introduction. And I also want to thank you, Ian, that's not here today, but who invited us to participate in this seminar. So Draulio gave us a really good idea of what's psychedelics and what is ayahuasca. And now I will tell you about a little bit about our randomized trial. So we conducted this trial here in Natal, in the University of Rio Grande do Norte. And we here you can see the protocol that we used. So as a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial, we want to say that we have 2 groups. That we have the patients, so all the patients had depression, and we divided these patients into groups, and which will assign one treatment for each of these groups, and no one knows which treatment will be gave. So neither the patients know, and nor the researchers. So this is why we call this double blind. And this is the gold standard of the clinical trials when you are like trying to develop a new substance, a new medication. So here in this scheme, you can see the experimental session that included 4 days of assessments. The patients arrived at the hospital in one day, and we did a lot of assessments, as for example the clinical evaluations by the psychiatrist, neuropsychological tests, MRI and fMRI acquisitions, and the patient slept at the hospital. During the time we did a polysomnography. The next day, we collected saliva and blood samples, and we did the dosing session. So in this day, the patient received or ayahuasca or the placebo. During the dosing session, we assessed EEG, electroencephalography, and also we apply some questionnaires to understand how it was the experience, the psychedelic experience, and also to measure the depressive symptoms. Then the patient went home, and next day they came back to the hospital, and we did the same measures again. So we applied the same questionnaires, the same tests, and the same evaluations. And then in the 2 days after the dosing session, they went home again. 7 days after, we asked the patients to return to the hospital, and they had another psychiatric evaluation to see how it was the symptoms of depression. So some of the characteristics of the trial that I already mentioned, it was a parallel arm design trial. So half of the patients had placebo and half ayahuasca. We used a dose of 1 milliliter per kilogram of ayahuasca or placebo for each patient, which is almost the same that as used in the rituals. So in this church that Draulio mentioned as Santo Daime, União Vegetal, they use more or less the same dose of ayahuasca. And besides 35 patients with treatment-resistant depression, we also included in the trial 50 health volunteers that was used as a control group. Here you can see the setting. So the patient was sat in this chair and remained quiet, and most of the time we had a playlist, and so in some moments the patient was listening to music, and in other moments it was in silence. And for most of the sessions, me and Draulio, we were like sitting next to the patient, but not in the same room. We were like watching in a safe distance if they needed anything. So the first result that we had from this trial was regarding the antidepressant effect. So indeed, ayahuasca had this rapid antidepressant effect that lasts for 7 days. So here in this graph, you can see here in the y-axis is the score of the MADRS. MADRS is a psychiatric scale used to measure the severity of depression. So high scores here indicated more severe depression. And here we have the time. So before the dosing session, 1 day after the dosing session, 2 days after the dosing session, and finally 7 days after the dosing session. In red, we see the scores from the ayahuasca group, and in blue, the placebo group. So as expected, we do see a placebo effect. So here we observe a reduction in the depressive symptoms of the patients who drank placebo. But we can note that the reduction here in the ayahuasca group are greater than in the placebo group. And this difference is even bigger 7 days after the dosing session. So here you can observe that for the placebo, we can see this placebo effect 1 and 2 days after the treatment, but then 7 days after, the scores return almost for the same level from the beginning, which not happened with the ayahuasca group. So ayahuasca group has this great reductions, and which is maintained from 7 days. So this is very impressive, because even if we already observed that with the other trials, the open label trials, here's the first time that we are controlling for this effect, the placebo, which is really happening also. So in the second part of the investigation, we try to understand. Sorry, I forgot this one. So as another result, secondary analysis that were made with this same data, we also observed impact of ayahuasca on the suicidality. So we analyze the data now looking only for this suicidality item from the scale, and we observe the same behavior. So here in red, we see the ayahuasca group, and we see that also we observe a significant reduction on this suicidality, on suicidal ideation, starting 1 day after the dosing, and which is sustained for 7 days. So in the second part of the investigation, we try to understand why that's happened. So which are the potential mechanisms of actions? So one thing that can be accounting for this result is what has happened during the session. So that's the discussion about that. So are the subjective effects that happen during the session mediating the results, the therapeutic effects that we are seeing a few days late? So to assess this hypothesis, we measure the psychedelic effects during the session using this questionnaire, which is hallucinogenic rating scale, which it's divided in some factors as intensity, synesthesia, affect, perception, cognition, and volition. And here we see that for all the factors, besides the affect, there is a significant increase in people in the participants from the ayahuasca group, the patients from ayahuasca group. And interesting, we observed that the subjects, the patients who experience more changes in the perception factor were that improved more 7 days after. So this is not a causation, this is only a correlation analysis. But in this case, we are saying that, okay, maybe what's happened in the acute effect, so what's happened during the session, can be influencing the beneficial effects that we are seeing 7 days late. But we also assess a lot of biological, biochemical markers in order to understand what is happening at a biological level. And here I will present some of that biomarkers. Here in this first research, we investigated the modulation of cortisol, which is a hormone related to depression, in our patients. And we observed that the patients in the ayahuasca group had a modulation. So we measured that, again, before the treatment and after the treatment. And we observed that after the treatment, the patients in the ayahuasca group presented similar levels of cortisol from healthy individuals, which not happened with the placebo group. We also investigated the BDNF the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a molecule implicated in depression, which is related to neuroplasticity. And we also observed that ayahuasca modulated BDNF after the treatment. So again, we observed an increased levels of BDNF in the patients after the treatment with ayahuasca, and only for the patients in the ayahuasca group and not the placebo group. Also, we analyzed the potential inflammatory biomarkers that could be modulated by ayahuasca, and that are related to depression also. So in this work, which is I did not mention before, but all these biochemical analyses were made in a collaboration with the Professor Nicole Galvão, that also works here in UFRN. And here what we see is that before any treatment, so when we compare a control group, the healthy individuals, with the patients with depression, we observe that the levels of the C-reactive protein, which is this protein that are a specific biomarker of inflammation, are great in the patients than in the controls. So this is an observation that's already in the literature. So this is known that patients with depression will have increased levels of the CR protein compared to health controls. So what happened after the treatment as a decrease in the levels of this protein. So here in red, we see the baseline, and 2 days after treatment, 2 days after the dosing session, we observe a decrease in the levels of the CR protein in the patients from ayahuasca group compared that not happen in the control group. And also, we observe that those reductions in the in the levels of the C-reactive protein were correlated with the decrease in the scores, in the severity of depression at the end. So we observed a correlation between what has happened in a biological level and in this with the severity of depression. We also investigated the effects of ayahuasca, use some neuroimage techniques, as here in this case the fMRI. So we acquired fMRI images before the treatment and 1 day after the treatment with ayahuasca or placebo. And here this research was only with the control group, so these healthy individuals. And in this case, we investigated 2 resting state networks. So these resting state networks are a set of brain regions that works together. So we have a lot of resting state networks that are already known. So that's a visual network, DMN, which this one that I will talk about, the salience network, the motor sensory network. So there are a lot of resting states network, which that means that when you acquire this brain image, when the participant is only in rest in the scanner, we can observe this set of regions that are working together. So one of this network is the salience network, which is implicated in the regulation of emotions and also introspection, and also in how you perceive the stimulus around you. And the other one is the default mode network. which is the network implicated in cognitive processes that are self-referential. So these regions are more activated when you are like thinking about yourself, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, and so on. And this, what we observe here is that after 1 day after the treatment with ayahuasca, we observe an increase in the salience network and a decrease in the DMN. This decrease in DMN was already observed during the acute effect of ayahuasca. So here we are saying that in the subacute effect, so 1 day after, we are seeing the same, also that the DMN its activity is reducing. We also tried to relate what was happening during the session, with these results. And we observed here that a positive correlation between the changes in this connectivity in the between these two networks. So the changes that you are seeing 1 day after the treatment were related with changes in affect during the dose session. This result besides although it was analyzed only the controls in the healthy individuals, also help us to try to understand what could be being responsible to the antidepressant effect of ayahuasca, because this salience and DMN, the full mode network, are also dysregulated in patients with depression. So to sum up the results, we can say that ayahuasca has antidepressant effect, and the underlying effects of ayahuasca are indeed multifactorial and can be since biochemical changes, as I show you, in cortisol, in BDNF, and in inflammatory biomarkers, to subtle subjective process that happens during the session. And this work helps to support the therapeutic value and safety of the psychedelics when administered in an appropriate setting, as we did, and to help treat depression and other psychiatric disease. And here to show you a little bit of our team. It was a project that ran from 2014 to 2016, collecting the data, and with the participation of a lot of people, and some of them are here. I want to thank you for the invitation again. And if you have any questions, I'm pleased to answer.